Hey there guys, just putting up a kind of a bonus video for you here. I know I've been trying to do a little extra YouTube content for my viewers here now that my kind of article series has been changed. Things are a little busy, you aren't going to get a ton of extra stuff, but I am going to still try and do some extra stuff. Sorry this is a bit off-center, just deal with me for a minute, it's centered up to the Magic client. But anyways, we've been talking about in the past couple of weeks in my Magic Online Academy series about guildgates and the impact that they may or may not have to the format. So this here is the first article I wrote, and I'll put a link down in the description. And this is kind of talking about whether or not they were going to have an impact, kind of just, I guess a little speculating. I have been called out for it. I don't like to speculate. I guess some of it is kind of speculating. But I really just kind of wanted to talk a bit of theory without going into too much detail behind the gates and what impact they could have. And this is the section I kind of wanted to focus on, talking about mid-range deck. And now there's currently no basic mid-range deck for Pauper. I'm not sure this is such a bad thing. What mid-range decks there are may or may not be mid-range, depending on your personal definition of the format. I'm sorry, of the type. The bottom line is that we were trying to decide, I was saying that there could be an opportunity now that we have a little more color options. I kind of talked about Gate Creeper Vine and how that might be able to make things a little more possible, maybe be able to make, multiple color decks work out. Things that, do a little control, a little aggro, a little everything. Now basically the definition for mid-range that I often go off of is from LSV. He says, if the mid-range deck is playing against a dedicated aggro deck, then it tries to be control. If it is playing against a true control deck, then it takes on the aggro role. Against combo, it can go either way, but usually has to resort to beatdowns. This is, I think, the best definition of mid-range. Kind of mid-range is a deck that's trying to do everything. It's trying to counter everything. It doesn't do any one thing very specific. So when I've been talking about gates, I've been, in my second article, and depending when I put this video up versus when the article gets posted, it may or may not be up. Either way, I will put the link in the description for that as well. There will be a video announcing it. Anyways, the second article in my kind of two-part series on guildgates is about how the decks could show up. I've made 5 decks for the 5 guilds that we currently have available to us in Return to Ravnica. And, I had a little bit of trouble with the blue and the white ones, as you'll see in the article series. Azorius and Celestia really kind of failed on some levels because of the fact that white isn't exactly a strong color. It doesn't bring you a lot in the way of control options, and aggro is okay. It's kind of, I don't know, I almost feel it's undetermined. Now, mono white aggro is a very strong deck. It's been around forever, and I'm not trying to put it down in any means. It's definitely something very strong, but it works very well as a single colored deck. It brings in things, like equipment to bonus things out, and if you look at the removal, it's not great. You have things like Unmake, but that's a cost of 3 white, and Exile, it's got to be an attacking creature, and it also has to be non-white. So it causes some issues. It's just not as strong as some of the other white removal that we're familiar with, things like Swords to Plowshares and Path to Exile. So, if you go blue-white, you kind of play counter control, and white doesn't really bring much to the table except for maybe some life gain, blinks and stuff like that you can do for a little bit of combo action. If you go green-white, you lose control altogether because green doesn't have any control. Okay, I know someone's going to get on me for that. What control green does have is not very good in comparison to something like blue or black. How about that? So what I kind of thought is, I think the best opportunity for a mid-range to kind of come together is going to be kind of in the Bant colors. And Bant, for those who are not familiar, is one of the shards in Shards of Alara block that was talked about. It is blue, white, green. And I think this will allow you to kind of pick up all those things, because blue-white doesn't exactly have access to kind of the big creatures that green has, and green-white doesn't have access to the control that blue can bring. So I think the 3 of them will put together a really great deck, and this is something I may actually revisit as soon as Gatecrash is released. We do have Azorius came out in this, and Celestia, but we did not get Simic. Simic would be kind of the third part to this deck. Simic is the green and blue. So, right now it's a little bit gimped, a little maybe too heavy on white for a deck that's not, as you can see, running very much white. But our guild gates, what we have available to us, this is it. And I wanted to kind of put it together. It's something that I wanted to see how it worked currently, and we'll see what we have offered to us in Gatecrash. There could be a lot of alters that could be made to this. I think there's some good stuff that came out of Return to Ravnica that can make this work really well. But at the same time, it's something that you see here. There's very few Return to Ravnica cards that are gold. I do have the Centaurs in here because they were fantastic. There's no doubt that this is a great card, and it's unfortunate that it really doesn't have a home in any current deck. I guess we'll kind of get into this here. Now, one of the things you'll see, I am running 6 of the guild gates. It's something I didn't want to be running a full set of each, because of the fact that they do come into play tapped. It does slow down your deck a lot. Something you don't necessarily want to be doing in a control deck. This is more mid-range. I assume it's trying to be mid-range. I'm not going to get in the debate on whether or not it is. It's trying to be able to do some aggro and do some control at the same time. So running a whole bunch of lands that come into play tapped is not to your advantage. If you look at Simic, if we bring Simic in, jump ahead to Gatecrash, if you ran a full set of each of the 3 guild gates, you'd be sitting on 12 lands that come into play tapped. That's going to be like half your mana base, and you really don't want that. I think 6 is a pretty good opportunity, a pretty good number to run. You see, I broke it down now. I'm running 3 of the Azorius guild gates and 3 of the Celestia guild gates. When Simic comes around, I may try breaking it down to 2 of each. And I think I'm going to try and revisit this once we get Gatecrash and see what can or cannot be done to alter this, make it better. As it stands, this deck is mildly casual. It's, I guess, maybe borderline casual. It's not anywhere near ready to be a competitive contender. I would have to build a sideboard for it, and I would have to play around with it a little more. Just tweaking. And I've been doing a lot of 100 card singleton recently in preparation for the PRE that's about to run. And when you try and make something competitive, you play it into the ground over and over, and you're constantly tweaking cards and numbers, and you say, okay, well, what if I reduce this to 2? Is this still enough? And what if this goes to 3? Or what if I reduce 1 land? Or, it's constantly tweaking. You're constantly evolving a deck to make it kind of work out. So, it's something that I think it has a lot of potential to be competitive at some point in time, but it really would require a bit more of a time investment, something that I personally can't give it right now. If you want to take this and give it a run and see how it can work out for you, that would be fantastic. Go for it. I encourage it. But anyways, I think splitting that down into 2 of each would be kind of a nice balance. It would hit most of the lands. The deck is definitely heavier on the blue, as you can see here, because I tend to be a bit more of a control player, so I try to get blue a little bit heavier. I like the draw off blue. I like the control aspect off blue. But I am running, you see, an even number of green mana because of the fact that green is also a very important color with this breakdown here. Not just for the fact that it's got numbers behind it, okay, half of my deck is green, half of my deck is blue kind of thing. It also comes down to the fact that I need the green mana available to me for things like the Gatecreeper Vine and the Harrow. The land fetch is great, it's very important to a deck like this, but if you don't have the green mana, it does you no good. So sometimes, even if green is not your most played color, you have to stack a little bit extra green mana available to you so that you can increase the opportunities to get the land fetch going. Having extra green mana is, even if it's your not number 1 color, is great, because if you get Gatecreeper Vine, and I'm going to stumble over that a lot, if you get one of those, you can fetch out the blue, which is your number 1 color. It's pretty easy to make that kind of adjustment. Let's pull up the stats here and see if that will work. Yeah, see, you can see that blue is my number 1 color here. It's taking up almost half of my colors. So, even though green is not the number 1 color, I am running a lot of green mana, because if I get green mana and I have a mana fetch, I can find the blue I need. and I'm not going to be so critical over missing it. Having an early Gate Creeper Vine is much more important to me than getting an early Pestermite. Pestermite is a mid-game kind of thing. It's going to come in at 3 instead of 2 mana. And so if I have 2 greens in hand, I can use Gate Creeper Vine to find the blue mana I need to play Pestermite on turn 3 if it's that critical. So just something to keep in mind for your own personal deck building. Now I've been long saying that with the gates, I think the most important thing for a mid-range that's going to come around, or even a multiple colored deck that's going to come out of this, it's got to go in green somehow. I think with the Gate Creeper Vines being able to fetch out these guildgates, these new Pauper duels, it's really the most critical thing because of the fact that it allows you to fix mana. Green is something that's going to have to be played when you're doing 3 colors. I wrote a series a while back talking about whether or not multiple colored decks would work, and they can, but I really think they need green behind them in order to fix the mana. And Gate Creeper Vine is so much better than something like a Ranger that can get just a basic land. The Gate Creeper Vine allows you to find the dual lands as well as one of these. So keep this in mind if you're going to try building your own things. I'm just trying to give you a couple of hints on things that could work out for you. The vines are also very important. I am running 2 copies of Harrow as well. And the reason for this is that when you're playing control, sometimes having the mana available is very important. I like to let's think how to word this. When you're playing control, a lot of times you're playing, counter magic. You're playing reactionary control. So during your opponent's turn, you want as many lands untapped as possible. Now, if you're doing mono blue, this is usually pretty easy. You can do things like, play fairies. You can use Cloud of Fae to untap. You can use Spellstutter Sprite and get your creature base that way. You can put down Delver, which is small and not require you to play a lot of mana. So that's how you can work it. But if you're running a deck that's kind of mid-range like this, where you have a number of cards, even if you went with things like Journey to Nowhere and Enchantment Control, if you're playing cards that are sorcery speed, then you're going to tap out your lands and you're not going to have mana available during your opponent's turn to make the plays you need. So it's very important to do things like the Gate Creeper Vine and Harrow. If I can ramp up my mana and I have a lot of mana available to me, not only does it increase the opportunity for me to have untapped lands during my opponent's turn, it also gives me an opportunity to play multiple control spells in a turn. Having 2 mana untapped is great. I can get 1 counter spell going. Having 4 to 6 mana untapped means that I can get not just a counter spell. I might be able to kick Prohibit. I might be able to play Pestermite and a counter spell. And the more control options you have available to you, the better. So it's color fixing, but at the very same time, ramping up that mana is going to be very important to being able to keep control going at this game. I brought in 2 copies of Harrow. I did want more than just Gate Creeper Vine. I had thought about bringing in something like Explore as 3 copies, but the thing with Explore is, it's nice. It does allow you to draw cards, but if that card you draw is not land, it's not really doing the land ramp. It's just acting as something like Think Twice without the kickback. I'm sorry, the flashback. So, there's other options. There's stuff like, Kadama's Reach and stuff like that, but Harrow, I think, gives you an opportunity to make plays. Harrow I always thought worked well in kind of control decks or mid-range because of the fact that the lands go immediately into play and they go into play untapped. So you can, if you have 3 lands available to you, you tap 3 out to play Harrow, sacrifice a land, and then you put 2 lands into play untapped, which gives you an opportunity to play another spell. You can use an accumulated knowledge or a counter spell, etc., as necessary. So I think that's a good choice. I also didn't want to go too heavy into it. You do want some mana fixing. I did want land ramp, but if I put too many card slots into fetching lands, I'm going to find myself in a situation where I'm mana flooded, and I really didn't want that. There's a very fine line between having enough mana and not enough mana. I'm sorry, having mana available to you and then being, land flooded and having too much land. Anyone who's followed me and any period of time knows that one of my least favorite things is to get swamped with lands, and I will cut it down to a bare minimum and be land screwed, because I'm okay with that, but getting flooded is not okay. So on that note, you see I am running 22 lands as well. It's kind of a low cost, but I'm sorry, a low number, but your average converting mana cost here isn't great. You have 4 as your highest spell on the ninja, and hopefully you're not going to be playing that for 4 anyway. You want to be playing that for 2. So that is that. Now I did want to, of course, bring in the Centaur. I said this is definitely an underrated card. This was brought in to Return to Ravnica, and it's great. The downside to it, it's a 3/3 for 3 that gains you 3 life. Now that is incredibly cost efficient. That's usually something we see at a much higher cost. We did have an elephant that was printed in shards for 3, a green and a white, I believe, and it's only a 2/3 body and gains you life. But you know, you look at that, that's a smaller creature for more mana. This is incredibly cost efficient. Getting a 3/3 for 3 is sometimes a rare thing to do, and this one gains you life, and the drawback to it is that you have to play green and white, which is not hard in this deck. Now I think the reason that this hasn't seen a lot of play currently is because there is no real green and white deck that is stable out there. There is a green and white deck that is, you know, before people jump on me, it's basically a hexproof variant thanks to Ethereal Armor, which was printed also in Return to Ravnica, and that is just very, very powerful. But, you know, the Centaur Healer has no point in that deck. It doesn't fit with the strategy of that deck, which is creatures that your opponent can't touch. Centaur Healer is great, but there is no point for it. You know, I said in that other article, if it's up, or, you know, check it out when it goes up, it's kind of hard to put together a green and white deck. It's really... I had some struggles with it. Just basically green-white aggro is not fantastic for Pauper. So no matter how great the healer looks, it can bring you all kinds of issues trying to find a spot for it. But I think this is where it can shine. It gets you a bit of life gain. It's a really great body for its cost. Like I said, 3/3 for 3, you can't pass up an opportunity like that, and the life gain is just great. I also brought in 2 copies of Pride Mage. I do like running, you know, I've run Elders before, stuff like that in the main deck. Wookiee Elders. I do like having some main deck options for enchantment and artifact control. Not just that, the Pride Mage allows you that exalted effect as well. You want to talk again about, you know, cost to power ratio, and the Pride Mage is another one. You're paying a 2 for a 2/2 creature, and he brings so much more to the table than just being a 2/2 body. He, you know, pumps 1, so if he's the only one on the table, he's going to attack as 3/3. And he also allows you that control option, so it's a really great card. Again, a bit underused because of the fact that there is no green and white deck out there currently that has a slot for him. So it's really great. I liked bringing a couple of copies of that, you know, again, talking control, and if you ever built a sideboard for it, it's an easy thing to kind of side out. When you're playing control, you know, you want to get these smaller creatures. I talked about having as much land untapped as possible. So, you know, you can play these smaller creatures and use that exalted ability to do extra damage to your opponent, you know, off of not having a lot of creatures on the table. So it's kind of how we get away. This ended up being a lot more creatures than I wanted to at 18, but that's okay anyways. You know, so, you know, you get things like the Pestromite. If you're in kind of a stalemate with creatures, you get a Pestromite that's attacking alone, and all of a sudden, you know, it's a 3/2, and it's not so troublesome to your opponent, but it's still something that he's going to have to struggle to deal with because of that exalted ability. So, also wanted a bit of card draw, so that's where this little set here. Not a lot of card draw here. I love drawing cards. The Vines and the Harrows are going to help you thin out your deck a little bit, but the more card draw, the better, but there's not a lot of great options for it. I didn't want to bring in stuff like Compulsive Research, which is a heavier draw, but at a bigger cost. I like Accumulated Knowledge. The first couple are mediocre, but when you get to that 4th Accumulated Knowledge, with the other 3 in your graveyard, it really draws a lot. The more draw, the better, especially in control. The fact that it is an instant card draw as well is very important. Like I said, if you're trying to be a control player, then you want to be able to make plays during your opponent's turn. And if I have to tap out to play something like Compulsive Research, then it's going to hold me back from playing counter spells. I also brought in 2 copies of the Ninja. Ninja's great, you know, blue decks use it all the time. It's great draw ability, and because we're using some of the flying off Pestromite, it's going to give us an opportunity to kind of sneak those guys in there and get some draw off them. I really, you know, I really wish there was more room for draw, but I thought that I didn't want to go overboard with it. You know, I really tried to keep a balance between 3 colors, and I'm very addicted to drawing cards. It's definitely troublesome. So if I kept loading this up on draw spells, then I think we would have a bit of an issue here. I think it would be a little less cohesive. It would be more of a blue deck that I was just throwing other colors in to throw other colors in. So, again, Ninja, not a great body, but the fact that it can draw cards, it gives me opportunities for replayability on the Centaur Healers and the Pestermites. That's also very important, So if I get a Pestermite and I can swing with it and sneak in a Ninja, I can also have that Pestermite now back in hand, and I can replay it so that it can tap out another creature once again and gives me an extra turn to keep control down. I mean, I'm running a set of 3 Pestermites here. And with the Ninjas, it basically says that my opportunity to use Pestermite is, you can consider it 5 times, based off of the fact that, I have a chance to, at the very least, use the Ninjas to return Pestermite twice to my hand. So that, I think, is a great thing as well. And the life gain off the Centaur is also, it's kind of your biggest body at 3/3, which can be a little troublesome at times, but it kind of makes do, and being able to switch it out if you can sneak one through there and gain extra life afterwards is going to be definitely an important thing. So this is my control package, this long set of cards here. Kind of an interesting control package. I talked about white does not have a lot of options for creature kill. Most of it is enchantment removal, like the best ones for efficiency. Things like Journey to Nowhere and Oblivion Ring. But so you have to kind of make compromises. And when it comes to blue, your control options are usually bounce spells or tap spells. And then if you go to green, any kind of control that you're going to do is going to be done during combat, and things like pump spells, mutagenic growth that make creatures bigger during blocking or attacking. That's going to be how green controls things. If you look at Stompy, they use +1/+1 counters and all kinds of stuff to make their creatures bigger so that they can control their opponent's creatures. And I kind of wanted to address all aspects of this in this deck because we do have those colors available, and each one, is important for different ways. There's opportunities where bouncing a spell is going to be great, and there's other opportunities where you want to kill it outright or, pump it up. So I did address all 3 of those. Now let's start over here. I brought in 3 copies of Azorius Arrestor, and this is a great card. I drafted it heavily during Return to Ravnica. I was definitely a big fan of it. It's a 2/1 for 2 that detains a creature, and detain is one of those new mechanics that we were introduced to in RTR. It basically says that activated abilities cannot be played on a creature, and it cannot attack or block until your next turn. So, I think this is a great option. I had done a video a while back, if you search through my channel, where it was a fanfic. Someone was trying to do mono white control. And I kind of said that you can't really do mono white control because of the current options that we have out there. Again, stuff like Exile and stuff like that. It's not ideal, it's a little costly, stuff like that. But I think for a mono white control deck, this guy is great. He's, pretty good when you look at cost to power ratio, and the fact that he detains a creature is fantastic. I think that works very well. I really enjoy it. I didn't run a full set of them because I think that, again, is overkill. I think 3 is a kind of nice spot for it because while I think it is great for white control, it's not really something I want to just load up on creatures. I think there's other opportunities to build stuff off there. Now, the other options I had for white control, like I said, is on Make. I think that is probably, I didn't want to go with the enchantments. Journey to Nowhere and Oblivion Ring are definitely the best next options for mono white control. That being said, I didn't want something that would be done at sorcery speed. I wanted to try and get a little instant speed. And I did have some options available to me as far as what I could do, but none of them were very good. You do have the new card in Return to Ravnica that allows you to kill a creature for 3, 2 and a white, but that creature has to do damage to you first. And, something like killing a Crusher that just did damage to you is, okay, it's dead, but hell, you just took 8 damage, so it's again not great. And my option here was not great either. I went with Puncturing Light. And this is something that I think is a great card for this deck in the main if you're using a sideboard. I think I've talked a lot about Pauper, and a lot of the generic decks that you see out there will be covered by Puncturing Light. It's kind of the average. If you took all of the possible cards used in the popular decks and you created kind of a graph showing the converted mana cost for creatures. I'm sorry, the power for creatures. The majority of creatures will come at 3. If you look at a lot of the big threats, like a flipped Delver, it comes in at 3/2. It's going to be covered by Puncturing Light. What kind of escapes it is if you come into Affinity, they run a lot of that 4/4 bodies, and I talked about, God, I'm sure people are tired of hearing me say this, but I talked about how once you get to 4 toughness, you're kind of in an advantage because of the fact that you're out of range of stuff like Lightning Bolt. So 4 to me is kind of that magic number in Pauper, and anything below 4 is fair game, and it's very common. Even something like the Spire Golems. Spire Golems have a 4 toughness and are hard to deal with. You can't deal with it with Lightning Bolt, but you can deal with it with Puncturing Light because of the fact that it has that power of 3 or less. So, Puncturing Light is something that is going to be completely useless in certain matchups. If you're playing against, Delver or probably even Green Post, something like that, Puncturing Light is going to be useless to you. It's going to be 3 dead cards. And I'm okay with that for the fact that most of the decks out there are running creatures that Puncturing Light can target. And again, I think if you were running a sideboard, this would not be an issue because of the fact that you could just bring those out and replace them with something else. If you're building a sideboard, keep that in mind that you have these 3 Puncturing Lights and need to replace them with something that can get rid of a creature that has a 4 power or greater. This is a decent spell, but again, Mono White Control doesn't have a lot of options. Maybe if you wanted to trade it out, and have 3 exiles in your sideboard, because a lot of the 4 toughness the 4 power or greater creatures that you're going to find are not going to be white. Things like the Carapace is 4/4, the Mere Enforcers are 4/4, the Crushers, Auroch Herds, stuff like that are going to be beyond the reach of Puncturing Light, and all of those are not white. If you look at, even Stompy is going to be able to get sometimes those, his Young Wolf could get pumped up thanks to Hunger of the Howlpack to beyond that 3 power. So if you can switch it out for Exile, you'll be able to get rid of those and gain some life off it. Decks like those are going to want to attack with those big creatures anyways, so having those 3 exiles in the sideboard to switch out is probably going to be a good thing. Again, I didn't take the time to build a sideboard for this, but I just wanted to kind of throw that out there because I know Puncturing Light is not great, but I do think it has a decent spot in this main deck because it can handle a lot of the creatures that are currently out there. Okay, so that's enough talking about that. Counter spells. Now, I didn't want to bring in straight counterspell because of that double blue mana cost. It's definitely harder to use because of the double blue. You do have options thanks to the land fetch to find double blue a bit easier, but things like Mana Leak are going to be more important to you because of the fact that you can use that one colorless. Blue is very heavy in our mana base, but we're not, running many blue lands because of the fact that we have to split our lands 3 different ways. So if I have to devote 2 blue lands, 2 blue mana sources into one spell, then that doesn't leave me a lot of options as far as other spells I can play that may require blue. So using things like Mana Leak, I decided to use Rune Snag here, are very important. And I'm constantly debating back and forth between Mana Leak and Rune Snag. Mana Leak, every Mana Leak is going to require 3 mana for your opponent to stop you from countering. Rune Snag scales up, so the first one is going to require only 2, but the second one is going to require 4, and so on, 6 and 8, the whole way down the line. I always debate this because I run decks and I use Mana Leak, and then it gets to a mid-game situation and my opponent easily has 3 mana available to him, and now all of a sudden my 3 Mana Leaks that are still in my deck are completely useless to me because there's never a time where my opponent is going to tap himself out that much. At the same time, Rune Snag, that first one is not very good. The second one is better, and they just get increasingly more powerful, so there will be times where you need to just kind of throw one away to get that count starting in your graveyard. I mean, there's no great options. I had also toyed around with the idea of bringing in something like Condescend or Syncopate, which was also a recent thing with RTR, but I believe is a reprint. Anyways, things like that X and a blue mana cost, it's okay, but to get that to... Alright, how am I going to word this? If you look at Confiscate, you pay X and a blue and counter target spell unless they pay X, okay? Now, to get that to equal Rune Snag, you need to pay 3 mana, 2 colorless and 1 blue, to prevent to make it so your opponent has to pay 2 to stop you from countering. To beat Mana Leak, you have to pay 3 colorless and a blue, so that your opponent has to pay 3. Anything beyond that is going to require, pay X for the X amount that your opponent would play to stop you from countering. So it requires quite a heavy mana investment. Now, it works out really well in stuff like Izzet Post and Dimir Post because of the fact that they're generating so much extra mana off the Cloud Posts. This deck does have some opportunities to create a lot of heavy mana, but you don't want to devote all of it into a single counterspell. So I wanted to find options that had the colorless mana available to us and still gave us chances to stop a lot of spells as necessary. I felt Rune Snag was kind of good here because, like I said, I keep finding myself in situations in a mid-game where 3 mana is nothing for my opponent to play. If he plays, a whole bunch of lands, he's consistently hitting his drops, then it's not very hard for him to make his own plays and keep 3 mana available to stop my plays. I think the Rune Snag works better in the mid to late game. I also brought in 2 copies of Prohibit. This is a straight up counter spell. There's no option for your opponent to stop you from making the counter, unless they counter themselves. It does have restrictions, however. It does only stop something 2 or less for its base cost, and you have to pay the extra if you want to stop something with 4 or less mana cost. So it's there's definitely holdups, but this is the trade-off that you make for not using that double blue, and I think it's important to not use it. If you do go into that double blue, maybe it'll be more doable once we have the Simic Guildgate available to us. At this point in time, having only the Celestia and Azorius Guildgates available, it's going to require us to use a single. I mean, they both have white mana available to them. So to get double blue, I have to grab 2 Azorius Guildgates, which kind of holds me back because green is my second most common color. So I don't have that opportunity to get the blue and green that I need in the same land. So maybe by the time we get Simic Guildgate and Gatecrash, something like Counterspell will be more usable by a deck like this. Next on the chopping block is going to be Echoing Truth. I like to throw in 2 of these whenever I'm playing blue. If I'm playing black, I always make sure to throw in at least 2 copies of Echoing Decay. Storm is a real thing. It's hard to deal with. Having these in the main deck is great. It also works well against fairies or goblins or anything elves that are trying to put out a lot of little creatures fast. It's an automatic add every time. Next up is the Pestermites. Now, Pestermite is an okay card. Sorry, I feel my voice slowly dying here. I love Pestermite. I think it's another one of those fun, unloved cards. It's a 2/1 flyer for 3, so it's often ignored because of the fact that the power to cost ratio is a bit high. It does have flash, and the ability for it to tap and untap gives you a lot of options. Again, you talk midrange, and midrange is kind of suffering an identity crisis between whether it's control or aggro. And Pestermite gives you the opportunity to do both. You can use it to tap out your opponent's creatures and keep them locked down. You can use it to untap one of your creatures and block an opponent's creatures and kill it off that way. It gives you a lot of opportunity to make certain plays. Of all the fairies, I think it's one of the most underused. If I was doing, mono blue control, I think I might try and do fairy control where I'm using those in addition to the Spellstutter sprites and the Cloud of Fae. I think they work very well. They also give you an opportunity, and it's not something you would use very often, but you can use them to untap lands. There's other better uses for that untap, target permanent. But in this deck, mostly what you're going to be untapping and tapping is creatures, so keep that in mind. I think it's great. I say blue is pretty notorious for being able to control simply through, once creatures hit the field at least, they can only control through bouncing or tapping, and Pestermite is your tap, and Echoing Truth is your bounce, so we kind of hit all aspects there because the other blue aspect is counter control, keep it from getting to the field at all. So, last thing I threw in here, and this is probably the most interesting choice, something even I'm still a little unsure of, and that is the Thrill of the Hunts. Now, I had these 3 spots open and I was a little unsure of where to go with this, and I think I like Thrill of the Hunt. it gives you a lot of opportunities to kind of get an advantage. You can play aggro with this. It allows you an opportunity to make your creatures bigger and stronger, to do more damage fast to your opponent. You can play them fast. You can flash them back to do +2, +4 for one turn by casting it and then flashing it back. I think I like it here because of the fact that the flashback cost is white. It's something that is unused outside of slivers, but it's not a bad spell by any means. I kind of like it. It gives you an opportunity. I talked about how green's control options usually actually come down to the two things green controls are flyers, and it controls artifacts and enchantments. So I think when it comes to green, most of the things like Stompy and stuff like that, when they control creatures, it's like, I'm going to block with this weenie, but then I'm going to pump it up so that it is bigger than your creature, and your creature dies. So having Thrill of the Hunt gives us that opportunity. We can deal with creatures by pumping them up. I can block and pump up my Arrestor or my Pestermite into something that is more a bigger body and harder to deal with. And kind of the nice thing I like about it too is the fact that it gives +1/+2. This means if I use it on something like the healer, or the Pride Mage, or the Ninja, it can get to a point where that puts it, say the Pride Mage, it'll put it up to a 3/4, and it's sitting there. It can block and kill your 3/3 creature, but my creature is still going to live and yours is going to die. So it's something, again, I'm not totally sold on. I think maybe when we get access to Simic in the next release set, that may change. I have high hopes for there being some Simic card in there that is going to be great for kind of control decks or Simic decks or Pauper decks or all of the above, that will be able to take this spot. But I think for right now, I kind of like the addition, and I like kind of the ability it gives you. You want to talk about mid-range and having an identity crisis, and I think this deck does it, but it does it kind of successfully. It's drawing cards, it's got lots of control options in this whole package here, but it also can get kind of aggro-y, it gains life. I think it hits a lot of all the different areas and aspects that you want in Pauper, or any deck for that matter. So like I said, here's the deck list. Feel free to build it yourself, play around with it. Like I said, I just unfortunately don't have the time to try and make this competitive. I did the same with UB Delver, and I really wanted to try and sit down and hammer out and make it competitive, but I just don't have the time. I think I will try and revisit this in Gatecrash, but it's just something that I think has a lot of potential to maybe not be a top tier deck in the competitive environment, but could still at the same time make a showing. Could definitely show up as one of the rogue decks, something at least similar. I think it hones in on a lot of aspects that a 3-color deck would need before it managed to find its way into competitive Pauper. So I'm going to throw up a couple example videos. This actually took way longer to explain than I thought, so they will probably be separate, but I just keep an eye out. Those example videos will come up, a couple example games, see the deck in action. So I hope you enjoyed it, guys, and as always, check me out on MTGO Academy, at MTGO Just Sin on Twitter, and hopefully I'll get more content out to you guys soon. So see ya.